barbecue capital of the world and home of Elvis Presley. Please welcome your co-host, Bob Furness.
But where else do you have an ecosystem of 400 people that are all living at the same place, connected to each other in another way? It is a microcosm of what happens in the world.
And from the tornado capital of the world, home of the Oklahoma Sooners, here's your co-host, Amos Tanuma.
Welcome to the show. It is Amos Tanuma and Bob Furness, your co-host. Bob, how are you, man?
Doing well, Amos. Good to see you. Good to see you this morning.
Good to see you. If you are watching us on the video feed, we are both in pink because it's October and we have a special show for you. So this is not going to be a show about just the usual contact center and business stuff. This is going to be an even better and more important show than that. So let me give you guys some background. You know, I think I've said on this show before, like one of the reasons we started doing this was because I wanted to talk to Bob every week. So Bob and I are really good friends, and it's been an excuse to do that. But along the way, over the almost 2 years now, you know, with the old show and this new show, you know, it's over 100,000 downloads of, you know, shows for Bob and I. So just this conversation both of us have every week, it's been incredible, the response we've gotten. But those of you who may not know, Bob also has a second or a third job. Bob is the
number you have, but I'm trying. I'm trying to be comparable to him.
But Bob is the co-founder of a nonprofit, Warrior Princess. I'll let Bob kind of talk a little bit about Warrior Princess. What are you guys? What's the mission? And then we'll jump into the background. But really quickly, what's the mission of Warrior Princess?
The mission is to educate and engage women who are 25 to 45 on the importance of early detection of breast cancer. It comes down to, and we'll talk about how we got here, but that's the importance. The importance is it's a demographic. Mammograms don't start until you're 45. But 11% of cancers, of breast cancer this past year was in women 25 to 45. So it's a demographic that we believe there's not enough focus on. And so our goal is to bring focus to those women, to the men in their life, of the importance of early detection.
So for those of you who don't know, the Warrior Princess is actually named for Bob's late daughter, Keisha, and I want to get into that story. And many of you have listened to us for a couple of years may not know this, and I'm glad Bob is choosing to tell the story because I think it's important, and the mission of trying to save young women, and early is one that's noble. But let's go back a little. Let's talk about Keisha for a second. So you were a girl dad for most of your life. Talk a little bit about your daughter, who's no longer with us. But start from the beginning. I've never asked you this. How was Keisha as a kid, as a teenager? I only knew her obviously as an adult, but how was she as a kid?
So she was, the term that is most likely to be associated with Keisha is sweet. And when somebody talks about her that knew her, whether it was at 5 years old, 3 years old, 5 years old, or at 30, it was sweet. She was just one of those amiable, lovable children. Did not see bad in other people. And so as a child, she grew up just loving people, just wanting to be involved in family and just loving people. But she also had something that we could spend an entire show about also, because I think we learned a lot as parents. She had ADD, and not ADHD, but ADD. And so she was not a troubled child, but she was a child that created trouble as a parent. I can remember going to Keisha's room when she was in elementary school as a young child and saying, "Okay, we got to go to church, we got to go to school. So I need you to put your clothes on, put your shoes and socks on, put your clothes on, because we got to leave in 10 minutes." And you would go back in there and she would be standing there looking at her socks. Because I told her too many things to do, right? She can only do one at a time. So she wasn't hyper. She was sort of the opposite. She struggled in school because she might look out the window and just begin to focus on the trees outside, and everything else falls away. And so she was a child that you had to help her focus. And then somewhere around the middle school, I read a book on what the problem was, and I went, not only do I see my daughter driven to distraction is the book. So if you have kids in your family that you're going, there's something different, read Driven to Distraction, because not only did I see her, but it was like my lifetime, and I think we all have a little bit of ADD. I know when I have 17 windows open on my computer, I absolutely have ADD. So she was one of those children that struggled in school a little bit, but she went to college. Took her 7 years to finish college, but by God, she got that degree. She was a band geek in high school. She loved being a band geek, and she would tell you, "I'm a band geek." And then when she went to school for 5 years under scholarship, she went, "I'm a band geek." They got paid to go to college. So she was in the marching band. That was her thing, was marching band during high school and college. But she was just a lovable kid. She wanted to be a part of stuff. I can remember one time me being a driven an A-type personality that wants to win every game, wants to be a part of every winning shot, all that in high school. I can remember one time after a basketball game when she was in probably 9th or 10th grade, and she didn't play. She played the first quarter and then she didn't play anymore. And I was like, "Sweetheart, did you do something wrong? Was the coach mad at you?" And she goes, "Oh, no." And I said, "Well, did it make you feel sad that you didn't get to play?" She goes, "I had such a good time on the bench." Like, awesome. So take that into account when we start talking about who she became, because a little bit of a drama queen, skin her knee. You'd go out there and you would think, "Oh, she's been amputated." She's definitely been amputated. And you go out there and you're like, "I don't see anything, sweetheart." So a little bit of a drama queen, but wow, when she became the warrior, that all went away.
And I'm so glad you're sharing this, Bob, because one, I haven't heard some of this, and then secondly, I think for all of us who are listening, I mean, one of the reasons I'm doing this is because, look, if we can prevent even one young woman, women in their prime, it's worth it. I want to talk a little bit about when the diagnosis happens and this big C word enters your life, and and then everything sort of changes. Talk a little bit about, from her perspective, this vibrant young woman who was like just starting her life and all of that. How did that sort of impact her, and how did you see her sort of evolve? And then along the way, talk about the family and you, and we'll delve deep, because you and I spent plenty of time together in the middle of that.
So she was diagnosed. So she had been having some problems with, and by the way, I just wrote a blog for I just had a member of our organization who wrote a blog that had very similar symptoms. So she's having problems with her back. She was a daycare teacher, so she would go to the doctor, and the doctor would say, "Oh, well, you probably pulled your muscle. Let me give you some muscle relaxers." She was having some problems breathing. She had asthma, so they were saying, "Oh, well, it's your asthma." So she had some telltale things, Amos. We're not sure how long she had breast cancer, but she was diagnosed with stage 4, which probably is is at least a year and a half, somewhere in that neighborhood. But when she was diagnosed, I was away. She woke up one night. She was having trouble breathing. My wife took her to the emergency room. I was at a conference in San Francisco, I believe, and in fact, I may have been at Dreamforce. I think I was at Dreamforce, and this happened in 2013. And when they got there, the doctor said, well, we're going to do an x-ray. And they came back to my wife without me there and to my daughter and said, we found some issues in your lungs and we believe you need to go to an oncologist. So I got on a plane. That's a whole crazy story. I was able to get on a standby plane. And at 10 o'clock, I got back the next morning. We went to the oncologist that had treated my wife, and he just told us the worst story you could tell, which is not only does she have breast cancer, but she has it in about 4 or 5 places. And so it was in her spine, it was in her breast, both breasts, it was in some lymph nodes, it was just in a lot of places. And so cancer entered our world in a way that was not, it was always, we're going to fight. But it was what we used to call terminal cancer. We don't use that term anymore as in the way we speak. But metastatic stage 4 breast cancer has an almost no survival rate beyond 5 years. So of course you come home and read on the internet, which is absolutely the worst thing you can do when sick, but it's the thing we all do, right? And so you begin to understand it. So there was a moment there where we were frustrated about, why did she not see the signs? Why not my wife and I? But what we did is we very quickly shifted to, it doesn't matter what happened, how she got this, she has it. What are we going to do going forward? And so when we would talk to her, she would go, I'm going to beat it. And then she would write in her journal, I know I'm not going to beat it. So who was she? She was, when she got the word, she immediately went into survivor mode, into fight mode, into I'm going to do everything I can. And so she had an unusual relationship with her doctor over those 4 years that she fought. She was on 14 different regimens of treatment. Not 14 different times did she take chemo, but she took chemo 12 times and it would stop working and they would switch her to another regimen. So when I say a warrior, why call her the warrior? Because about 3 or 4 months in, you realize I would be in a fetal position in bed going, okay, I'm going to die. Never. I remember one time, maybe a little bit too graphic for a podcast, but she was leaning over this wastebasket sitting right there. And she threw up and had dry heaves for 15, 20 minutes. She goes, I guess that's better on the outside than it was on the inside.
That's such a sense of humor in the middle of that.
Yeah. And so that's where warrior came from. Princess came from the grace by which she lived. So it just made sense that she was warrior princess. And then our nonprofit was named in her name, called Keisha Warrior Princess. And that path came, again, we lived a 4-year bucket list. So if you've got someone in your life who is in this situation, right, who has been afflicted with cancer and are in a disease that has been, that you know that the survival rate is probably not good, instead of focusing on how you got there, especially if it's your daughter, your wife, your mother, begin to focus on, what are we going to do now? And then what would you like to do that you've never done? And so we put something in front of her. As a dad, I couldn't fix cancer. That was the only time, dude. If she had gotten married to a jerk, she could get divorced and come live at my house.
Right.
If she had crashed her car and couldn't afford a new one, I could help buy a new one. There was almost nothing as a dad that you couldn't fix. I couldn't fix it.
Yeah.
I couldn't fix it. So I focused on, about every 3 weeks, we had something in front of her. So she would literally walk out of a Luke Bryan concert, nut for Luke Bryan, like crazy. She knew his kids' names, his dogs' names. She knew the name of the ranch. Like, I'm telling you. But she would walk out of a Luke Bryan concert going, well, we go to Disney in 3 weeks. Or she would walk out of Disney and she would say, hey, we go to Colorado in 2 months. So there was something in her life that was to look forward for, something to live for. And I believe that is a big value when, and I've told that story to other friends who have been down that path and have done those things as a result of my conversations, and have come back and said, thank you for those words of wisdom. So that's how she became the warrior princess. It was about, she was no longer the little girl with the scratch underneath. She was doing things that don't make sense in light of living life as a warrior. And then the princess she just did it with such grace, with a smile. We look back through pictures now, and there's almost never a time there's not a smile on her face. That doesn't mean it was awful. It's horrible. But when we were in Colorado and she's in a wheelchair because she can't walk well, because the spine is so bad and her hips are so bad, you put that camera up and she was smiling.
And if you're just listening, you're listening to a special podcast where we are talking about Keisha Warrior Princess. It's a nonprofit co-founded by Bob. I want to pivot the conversation a little bit, and I hope you won't mind that I'm sharing this, because a lot of your work, at least in your part in this nonprofit, targets men, right? So the men and influencers, if you will, even though the focus is about saving young women. And I want to share the story because I think it's important if you're listening to this as a husband and a brother. I mean, it's talking about any woman's breast is uncomfortable, but you have to. It's important stuff, and we have to do it. I remember this dinner you and I had. I can't remember where. We're in so many cities, Chicago or somewhere, and it was in the depths.
Sorry, remember the life of a consultant when you actually got on planes and flew?
Exactly.
Exactly. Tell the story.
Like where I couldn't remember what city I was. That seems like it's a long time ago. But so we're having this conversation, and for context, for those of you listening, right? You know, this was going on in Bob and his family's life. 5 years, and it was. And by the way, Bob is a consultant, so he's trying to work and travel all around the world and do all this. So we're in this dinner and we were having this conversation, and at this moment, Keisha's not doing very well and things aren't looking so good. And somehow you and I get into this conversation where it was similar to what you just said about saving your daughter. And we started talking about Breaking Bad, and I said, like, could you ever be that character? And at first you went, I like to think I try to do the right thing, and then you go, well, wait a second. If that's what I had to do to save my daughter, I would kill all of that. And this is the most frightening part. So Bob looks at me right in the eye and goes, Amos, I love you like a brother, but even if you got in my way, like I will do anything. And so I want to talk a little bit about two things. One, how did you get to a place where you were comfortable bringing this to work? Because I would argue that this nonprofit started while Keisha was with us, in that at that point you had taken many opportunities to tell her story while she was still here. And while it wasn't this, you didn't have all the tools and stuff you have now, but you had started sort of this journey. So how did you get comfortable, start bringing it with you to work, and more importantly, this outreach you made to people like me? It wasn't formal. It was just like you hear the story and you couldn't help but think like, man, how can I prevent this from happening?
So the first thing, so my daughter was a unique makeup seller. I think they're called, I'm not sure what they're called. It's on a little award over there that she has on my
yeah, unique with the Y. Yeah, I know the brand. Yeah,
women's makeup, and it's almost like it's an empowerment organization. It does what I learned when she first started doing it. I'm like, well, that's nice. And then I realized and began to understand that she had this sisterhood, and in that role, she was living her life out loud. And so I went to her and I said, so I know you're posting about what's going on. And she did. Are you okay if I tell your story? And she said, yes. She said, I don't want anybody to go through what I'm going through. So that was the catalyst. And telling her story was about, again, telling how strong she was and how we as a family were dealing with grief, with the reality of cancer, and how, you know, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but the whole platitude concept that when someone has cancer, that you're looking for reasons to justify that it's a good thing.
right.
It's the opposite of what anyone dealing with it wants to hear. There is no good reason to have cancer, in my opinion. There is no long-term good. Are we doing good in our nonprofit today? I hope. Would I not want another woman to have my daughter back? Absolutely. And that leads us to that story. That was probably a little personal, but I'm okay to put it up. You know, the story of Breaking Bad, for those who maybe have not watched the show, little violent, incredible show. But the story is that the father is dying of cancer and he doesn't have any money to leave his family. So he makes this decision one day that at the time, you were against him for making this decision, but he makes this drug decision, this decision around making drugs that lead, and then he finds out he's going to live, and it just leads to his life totally falling apart. But there was this moment that he had made this decision, and that's where you and I were. Yes. I was like, I can't think of anything I wouldn't do to save my daughter. Yes. I'm not sure I would have offed you. But I would lose your friendship. I would step around you. There was nothing that I could think of outside of there were just a few things that I would not have done. And so I definitely would have, if it cost $1 million to save her life, you tell me anything I can do to get $1 million and I'm going to do it. I don't care what the consequences are, because she's going to live if that happens. Exactly. And so that's where that came from. And
you know, and to that point though is, you know, and part of why I wanted to share that is I can just believe there's plenty of girl dads and brothers who feel the exact same way as you do. And by the way, my response to you is exactly the same. Like if it's my kid, yes. So how about having a conversation about women's breasts, as uncomfortable it is? So instead of that, I mean, part of why we're having this conversation is that, you know, Bob doesn't want any other parent or anyone to go through what he's going through, and he'll do anything for it not to be the case. So talk a little bit about why men and people around these women has been so central.
So as you said, I brought this to work. When somebody would ask me about her, I would talk about her. You know, I just decided that I wanted them to know my daughter, but why I was getting up out of a meeting in the middle of a half-day meeting and saying I have to go, and getting on a plane because we had bad news at the cancer center. I wanted people to understand that, and if you want to know what kind of leader to be over a company, at the time I was working for Blue Wolf, and I was at home for a couple of days because we'd had some bad news. And I remember I got a call from Eric Barrage, and he said, "Bob, shut your laptop. We got you." I thought I was over all this tears, but he said, "Shut your laptop. We got you. You do what you take care of your family." That was the CEO. So I always had permission to make family first. But as you said, you don't expect her to die.
Right.
I look back now at those last 6 or 8 months and all the times that pop up on Facebook where I'm on some plane on the way home at 11 o'clock at night. And I'm thinking, why? I look at my wife and Susan and I say, why did I do that? But at the time, you knew that it was bad, but you just didn't, you were just going to do this one more, right? So that was bringing it to work. And then so you're right. I probably started this nonprofit in the middle of those conversations, but there was a catalyst. I wrote an article in 2018. My sweet daughter died in November of 2017. In 2018, for the same thing we're doing, October, the Breast Cancer Awareness Month, National Breast Cancer Awareness, I wrote an article to the paper, and it was it's on our website, which we can put the website up and let you know where to go and all those things. But it was called "The Question Every Dad Should Ask His Daughter." And the catalyst for that was, hey, you're a dad. Let me tell you that you do not want to go through what I'm going through. You do not want to have your daughter die at this age. You do not want to experience what we've experienced. So I wrote an article because here's what I knew. I asked my daughter, so you got gas in the car? Right. Now, like, you're not letting your car run off down to empty, right? You're like, when it gets to a quarter of a tank, you're filling it up. And if you can't do that, just call me and I'll come over and get it and fill it up. Are you being careful when you're in the parking lots? Because there's a lot of bad things that happen in parking lots. So when you're walking out of a class and it's dark outside, are you paying attention or are you looking at your keys? Remembering the ADD girl.
Right.
One thing.
Right.
On my keys. No vision around.
Okay.
Remembering that, I asked those questions. What I didn't say is, are you going to the gynecologist? Are you doing self-breast exams? And those are our two key elements. That's what our nonprofit is basically about.
Yeah. Get into that.
Breast exams and going to the gynecologist. Well, because she was not going to the gynecologist. Now, I live in the Bible Belt, and if there's a buckle in the Bible Belt, it's somewhere in Tennessee, right? And so she said, well, I wasn't sexually active. That's the reason why some women at that age go to the gynecologist. It doesn't matter. You got to go to the gynecologist. Why? Because when you're 23 years old and you go to a regular doctor, when you're 30 years old and you go to a regular doctor, she or he may not be thinking about clinical breast exams. He or she is probably asking you some questions that have to do with that you're a female, but but they're not asking the same questions that the gynecologists ask. And for those of you who are moms and have been to the gynecologist, think about the questions that they ask versus the regular doctor. And you'll walk over to your daughter and say, have you gone to the gynecologist? And so that's about clinical exams and the right questions. The self-check is about knowing your body. And so what the article talked about was, I didn't ask her the right questions. And these two things would have saved her life. If she had found it early, women who find stage 1 breast cancer, stage 0 or stage 1 breast cancer, have a 98% survival.
Wow.
98%. It goes down. Stage 2 is still somewhere in the 70s or 80s. And then at stage 3 and stage 4, it gets worse. So what we want to happen is you do a breast exam and you don't find anything. You just know your body a little bit better. But what we want to really happen is, as it relates to cancer, is that if there is something, you find it. And we've had story after story of women who have, as a result of this nonprofit, as a result of these conversations that I was not afraid to have, that have found something. Luckily, most have gone to the doctor and it was nothing. And I know we're running out of time, so keep me on track. So the nonprofit mission I told you before is early detection and community and education around that at 25 to 45, because that demographic is sometimes forgotten. And then men play a role, because you ask your wife or your daughter or your sister questions about life, but for some reason we don't want to ask about the breast. We don't want to ask about the quickest way to shut down a conversation is, oh, I have female problems. Okay. That's the end of that conversation. And what we should do as men is say, so tell me about that. What do you mean you have female problems? Now, there's some things that they may not want to tell. And I'm not telling you to do that at work. Don't walk around doing that at work. That'll get you in trouble. But I'm talking about the people that are close to you. I'll diverge just for one quick second. So one of the things that we do is we help women understand how to do a self-breast exam. And one of the items that we put together with my two female 30-something board members and my wife sitting on the Zoom, we had these conversations about how do we get graphic enough on this item, but not so graphic. So I'm having stories and conversations about breast in ways that I've never thought I would have with Keisha's best friend all the way from high school through college. But we should be there. We as men should not shy away from asking our wife, how are you? Let me ask you this. Do they ask you? They do. If you come home and say something about having a prostate issue, they want to know what it is.
Yes.
What is the situation? They want to know, are you going for testing? Why are we as men not just as adamant about that?
Right.
And why do we shy away? So that's how men play a part in this, is ask your daughter, ask your wife, ask your sister, ask your mom, are you going to the doctor? Are you going to the gynecologist? Are you doing self-exams? Those are two simple questions. And if you want a catalyst for doing that, tell this story.
Yes.
Tell them about a guy that all you've ever heard him talk about is contact centers. And then he had this special podcast and he told his story. So I'm asking you, what's your situation?
Bob, I appreciate you doing this, and our audience and the contact center in general. I mean, we're proud that it skews more women, and it's very young. It's a very young industry, so I'm happy we are doing this. I do want to end by I'm asking you to talk a little bit about if you've now heard this, and I love that one of the things I love about your nonprofit is the takeaway is very clear, right? It's like it's a very specific, two simple questions we can ask. How else, and we'll put the website and stuff up. How else should people learn from the story, and if they want to be a part of it, impact, share a little bit about what should folks do, go to the website. How do you want people who feel moved by this to react?
So the first thing we want you to do is to talk among yourselves that we just talked about. The second thing is reach out to us, like our Facebook page, like our Instagram, join our member list on our website. If you do that, we're going to send you one of these, and this is a shower card. It has a little place here like a door hanger. Your daughter or your wife or you can put this up on your shower head, which is a great place, we understand, for women to do breast exams, because you lift your arms, you're in another place is lying down, but this is there. It's got a great detail on the back about what those steps should be. It's got a little icons on the front, and this is sponsored by West Cancer Foundation, which is the cancer center where Keisha was treated. It's been validated. These are good steps. Now, so that's one. The other thing you can do is to engage with our community and with our with our Facebook page or our Instagram. And more importantly, are just as important, if you have a warrior story, we're doing hashtag warrior stories. If you're a woman who has been through this, you have a friend who went through this, you would like to tell their story to help us make this real. When I talk about my daughter, I don't want you as a father to think about my daughter. I want you to think about your daughter. When I tell the story, I want you to think about those in your life. And so if you've got those stories, help us tell those stories on our website. And then if you want to support what we do, we've given out over 25,000 of these in the last 14 months or 16 months. If you want to be involved in that, donate. These are waterproof. They're die cut. They're specially made. They're not cheap for us, but that is our primary giveaway. We're also working, as would be the case with us being a technology focused. We're working on plans to create an app that reminds women to do this. We found that that's a whole lot more expensive than we thought it was. But at some point over the next 6 months to a year, we'll be launching a campaign to help us build that. To put that in place so that you get a reminder on your phone once a month, and it's time for your self-check.
Awesome, Bob. I know this wasn't easy, but I'm glad you did it. I think it's important, and for all of you listening, yeah.
But I want to end with one quick story, and I'll tell the long story. So we have a video that's almost ready to launch. So if you will like our webpage, we'll send you notification. It's there. If you watch our socials, it'll be there. But it's a story about a girl that we both worked with at Blue Wolf. Her name's Ashley. And I got a call from Ashley about 4 or 5 weeks ago. We have somebody going out to video her. She lives in Ohio. We're gonna help us create a video to tell this story. But I'll tell my version of the story. She said, "Hey, Bob, I'm just calling to tell you saved my life." And I said, "Well, Ashley, what are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, I just got back from medical leave, and I found a spot on one of my breasts about several months ago. And I thought, it's nothing. And then I saw your face, and I saw your daughter's face, because you used to always share stuff on Slack. You share stuff on LinkedIn. And so I said I should go to the doctor. And I got to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, you're young. You're too young. There's probably nothing here. I don't see anything that should alarm you. And I said, Ashley, how old are you? She says, I'm 26. So she said, I saw your face. I saw your daughter's face, is what she said. I saw your daughter's face again, and I realized it could be me. And I said, well, I'd like to go through the clinical test. So they sent her to the test. Again, the doctor there said, I'm sure it's nothing, no problem, everything's good. We'll do the test. She ended up having a very, I don't know if the right word is aggressive, but the kind of breast cancer that doesn't go away. It just keeps coming back. And if you don't stay on top of it, it ends up becoming metastasized. So she ended up having a surgery procedure that makes her almost, it solves the problem. And she said, you saved my life. So why Amos agreed to this, I said, hey man, can we get on and talk about my daughter and our nonprofit? And Amos was absolutely, let's do this. But the reason why we did this today, and the reason why my wife and I, to some degree, live this story over and over again when we tell it. You can tell it's been, 2007, 2017, 18, 19.
3.5 years.
4 years in November. Still raw.
Yes.
Still extremely raw. And the grief is there. But the reason why we do this is so that we find more Ashleys. Yes. And I can hang out on Ashley's story. If I don't hear another story, in fact, what I hope is I don't hear another Ashley story, that I just have people saying, hey, I self-checked, right? But whenever you realize that you've impacted another human being who's not going to go through this, who's going to live, what's the give and get for doing this? Let's end with this. What's the give and get? The give is you take time to know your body. The get is you get to live longer to be here with your kids. You get to live longer to be here with your husband. You get to live longer. So the get is life.
Yes.
She lost hers. But what we don't want is anyone else to be in that situation.
It's a perfect place to leave it. Bob, it's such an honor doing this with you. And I love that even our shows has humanity in it. So until next time, good seeing you, Bob. And for the rest of you, we will chat with you next time.
We want to thank you for joining us on this episode of the Contact Center Show. If you would like to join the conversation, please visit us at contactcenter.tv. That is Contact Center, all one word, .tv. Or you can simply subscribe wherever you get your podcast. This has been a Beyond production.